Hey guys, in this video we're going to cover some of the latest Sylvester Stallone movie news. The director's cut of Rocky IV, the potential sequel to Demolition Man, which Stallone said, "We're working on it right now with Warner Brothers, and it's looking fantastic, so that should come out. That's going to happen." And then the recently released extended cut of Rambo Last Blood. In general, there are a lot of future Stallone movies to look forward to. The man does not stop. Oh, make sure to stay until the end of the video, by the way, because I'll talk about the possibility on whether or not there's life for Rambo after Last Blood. Talk of a Rocky IV director's cut comes directly from Sylvester Stallone himself. Now, even though Rocky IV may have come out in 1985, people still talk about this movie all the time. It is, after all, the highest grossing film of the series, making over $300 million worldwide theatrically, and that was in the 1980s. In 2020 dollars, that'd be the equivalent of over $718 million. Even though Rocky IV is 35 years old, it's still highly relevant today. 2018's Creed II, for example, is practically the sequel to Rocky IV. It's an amazing follow-up. Would have been a great movie by itself even without ever having seen Rocky IV. Of course, for those who don't know, we would see Apollo's son Adonis Creed avenge his father's death against Drago's son, who died at the hands of Drago in Rocky IV.
He dies. I gotta take the fight. Why? These dudes killed my pops.
As far as Rocky IV the director's cut goes, the reveal came about on Sylvester Stallone's Instagram when he was promoting the extended cut of Rambo Last Blood. In the comics section, someone asked him about a possible director's cut of 2006's Rocky Balboa. I don't really see any need for that. That movie is pretty much as close to perfect as you could get. It's really a love letter for the fans. Rocky Balboa was a deeply personal project for Stallone. He wrote it, he directed it, he of course starred in it. It took him years to get made. The studio just wouldn't greenlight it, especially after the dismal performance of Rocky V, but he stuck to his guns, eventually paid off. It was truly a passion project. He didn't do it for the money, he didn't need the money. He did it for us. He did it for himself.
Because if you're willing to go through all the battling you gotta go through to get to where you want to get, who's got the right to stop you? I mean, maybe some of you guys got something you never finished, something you really want to do, something you never said to somebody, something.
It's not surprising Stallone shot down talks of a Rocky Balboa director's cut down, but while doing so he did reveal the director's cut for Rocky IV, saying, "I am doing a director's cut on Rocky IV, which will be amazing." In general, Rocky IV is by far the most cartoony of the series. It's pretty over the top. It actually had a robot.
What the hell is that?
Rocky even literally ran up a snowy mountain at one point. But it was a lot of fun. It just screamed 80s. It was full of amazing montages. In fact, after one of the epic training montages, it would only take a minute and 15 seconds before we were given another amazing training montage. To summarize, 31.9% of Rocky IV is a montage. That's nearly a third of the film. With that said, I'm really curious what Stallone gives us in this director's cut. Now, I'm pretty sure he'll flesh out the narrative progression a little more, but wouldn't it be funny if he literally just turned the entire film into one giant montage? Either way, I'm very excited to see what we end up getting. On a side note, Rocky IV will always have a special place in my heart. This was Sylvester Stallone movie along with Rambo First Blood Part 2 that I grew up watching, as I'm sure many of you have as well. These were the two Stallone movies that my dad actually had a recording of on VHS. Growing up in a house without cable television, for you young guys that's like not having Netflix or Amazon Prime or any other streaming service, it should be no surprise that I've literally seen these movies like 100 times, but they never get old. From a pure entertainment angle, a rewatchability perspective, Rambo 2 and Rocky IV are the ones you could just play on a continuous loop. You couldn't really do that with, say, Rambo 1 or Rocky 2 necessarily. So aside from not having cable in the house growing up, we were also sorely lacking in sports equipment. In fact, we just had a single pair of boxing gloves, but that didn't stop my older brother and I from playfully but still somewhat painfully reenacting Rocky IV. We had some exhibition matches with a single glove apiece.
What are you guys doing? This is supposed to be an exhibition! You understand? An exhibition!
I just put the left glove on my right hand and do the best I could. Pretty ridiculous to think about looking back. But those were still fond memories, and my love for Rocky IV continues to this day. Chris Rock, by the way, had a pretty funny bit on Rocky IV back in the day.
So I'm watching Rocky IV the other day. I'm saying to myself, two white guys fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world? Boy, that Spielberg's something else.
Now, of course, things really changed in the 2000s when the Klitschko brothers dominated the heavyweight division in boxing. And who could forget the 2015 bout between Tyson Fury and Vladimir Klitschko?
Rocky takes place in a world where white athletes are as good as black athletes. So Rocky's a science fiction movie.
But Rocky IV isn't the first time a Stallone movie predicted the future. Look at Demolition Man, for example. It showed us GPS in cars, Skyping on iPads, and Zoom meetings. Now, it makes sense from a technology perspective that we'd eventually have some of the stuff shown in that science fiction movie in real life someday.
White guys cannot box.
Alright, Chris, we've moved on from Rocky IV. We're talking about Demolition Man now. But Demolition Man also casually mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger as a politician.
It's the Schwarzenegger Presidential Library. Wasn't he an actor when you...
Stop, he was president?
Yes.
Of course, he would become governor of California in 2003, 10 years after the release of Demolition Man. Oh, and let's not forget Scott Peterson. He's one of the names in the Demolition Man sent to the cryo prison. And of course, the real Scott Peterson was all over the news in the early 2000s and was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife, Lacey Peterson, as well as his unborn son. Speaking of Demolition Man, Stallone mentioned doing a sequel during a Q&A video stream on Instagram in early May of 2020. Sylvester Stallone certainly has a lot on his plate right now, and of course movie release dates and production schedules across Hollywood have been affected by what's currently going on in the world. Demolition Man 2 is probably at least a few years away at best. It would make the most sense for a 2023 release in my opinion, as that would coincide with the film's 30th anniversary. Oh, make sure to check out my video on Stallone movies in 2020 and beyond, by the way, linked in the description below. Also link it at the end of this video. You'll see that he has quite a few projects lined up in general, and that's not even including a sequel to Demolition Man. Story-wise, it's hard to say what they'll explore exactly. The original Demolition Man took place in 2032 and portrayed a utopian society with no crime or bad thoughts, a world where you could even get a citation for saying a curse word, which isn't exactly too far-fetched nowadays as we currently live in a high CPC sensitive culture.
Shit, you're a damn good fly.
You are fined 2 credits for violation of the verbal morality statute.
I'll be right back.
Obviously, the sequel wouldn't be able to take place in 2032 as the actors have obviously aged. It'd make more sense for it to take place roughly 30 years later. It'd be fun to see what kind of future is envisioned in 2060. It could be amusing, satirizing the modern day world. Also, I think everyone still wants to know how the 3 shells work, especially nowadays when we're still in a toilet paper shortage.
I don't know if you guys know it, but you're out of toilet paper.
But the place where you're supposed to have the toilet paper, you got this little shelf with 3 seashells on it.
Action-wise, if the film emulates the feel of the 90s, it would be a fresh change these days, since many action films today strive to have a realistic touch to them, which I have mixed feelings about. I kinda miss the over-the-top zaniness of the 80s and 90s action films. The original Demolition Man had a really solid supporting cast. There's a good chance and opportunity for a lot more of the original cast to show up. Dennis Leary, for example, played the leader of the underground resistance in the film. Sandra Bullock was a love interest.
What are you doing?
And of course, Wesley Snipes played the villain, Simon Phoenix. Although he met an icy end in the original film, there are plenty of ways they could bring him back in the sequel. Cloning, for example, would be the most obvious choice. Speaking of Wesley Snipes, I recently did a video on him that you should check out if you're a fan, or if you're just curious on why he was such a dominant force in the movie industries in the 90s and into the early 2000s. I'll of course link that video in the description below and also at the end of this one. So what do you guys think about a sequel to Demolition Man? And aside from Stallone, how important do you think it'd be to get a lot of the original cast back? Now, as far as Rambo Last Blood goes, I'm excited for the extended cut, as I haven't seen Last Blood since it came out in the theaters. I don't generally go to the theaters that often, but I definitely made sure to make it on opening weekend for Rambo Last Blood, and I liked it. I went in biased though. I still remember seeing John Rambo in the theaters back in 2008. I'm always going to support Stallone, and for good reason. He's still giving us great movies. I, like many of you, absolutely love both Creed movies, for example. Rambo Last Blood extended cut adds an extra 12 minutes. The main difference really is the alternate opening scene, which some people actually got to see, depending on the territory they were in during the film's initial release. We never seen this in the US though, for example, even though several production stills of it were shown prior to the film ever being released. It was actually a pretty personal scene for screenwriter Dan Gordon, and its inclusion would have helped create a more emotional hook in the overall story. It essentially has Rambo as a volunteer on horseback trying to help rescue some missing hikers during a rainstorm. Rambo is unfortunately unable to save them all, and the event triggers his PTSD. Writer Dan Gordon explained to The Hollywood Reporter, "That scene was really about my son. It's not losing someone you love as in the past and reliving of something that happened 20 years ago. It's that you keep on trying to save that person as if you can undo the past by saving others, and of course you always fail." It's kind of sad to think about, but from a psychological perspective, it would make sense. Humans have an innate desire to fix things after all. As far as Rambo Last Blood extended cut goes, Stallone has said, "This is a cut I worked on and always thought this cut was much, much better than the theatrical release. If you saw Rambo Last Blood in the theater, you owe it to yourself to see the real cut." He also made a reference as to depending on how this extended cut performs, on iTunes for example, the Rambo could be back. I mean, at the end of the day, a studio will greenlight a movie if they think they can make money on it. As far as a potential idea for a 6th Rambo film, Stallone said that the only place that Rambo would be able to find refuge following the events of Rambo Last Blood would be an Indian reservation.
That's why during the end credits, it's like, you know, no, I'm not going to wait for this. I'm going to try to do something. I'm going to at least be on the run. No one's going to stop me. The only place he could actually go where he could survive would be an Indian reservation. That's the only place, because they can't come on. It's federal. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's the only place where he could go and heal. Other than that, he's done.
So will we see Rambo right again after Last Blood? I wouldn't doubt it. What do you guys think about Rambo Last Blood, by the way, and this extended cut? Oh, and do you want to see Rambo return? Make sure to comment below.